is the review of the formative that was given as your attendance check-in last class. We actually will be having a Google Meet tomorrow to go through a lot of this. You guys, I do recommend that you watch the videos before you try any of these problems. But there's going to be a lot that we discuss tomorrow, so please make sure you attend the Google Meet during your class. Okay, so to find the period in radians, okay, we try this again. To find the period is P equals 2 pi over B, okay? And this is your B value, always next to X. So your period is 2 pi over 2, which equals pi, okay? That's how long it takes to complete one full rotation, okay? Let's see what the next one is about. Where does the cosine parent function start? Well, if you remember the parent function, okay, 1, -1, then you have pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, finally at 2 pi, okay? So the midline is at 0. But for cosine, the parent function, okay, starts at the maximum of 1. Because think of cosine of 0 is 1. Cosine of 90 is 0. Cosine of pi, or 180, is -1. Cosine of 270 is 0. And cosine of 2 pi is back at 1. So the parent function cosine starts at the maximum. Okay, so find the maximum of the equation below. Well, it's a sine function. This is your midline. So at -2 is your midline. Your amplitude is 1, so it's 1 above and 1 below. So your sine function starts at -2, then it goes to -1, then it goes to the -2, -3, and back to the midline. So the maximum is -1. And we get that from your midline plus your amplitude. Your midline minus your amplitude gives you the min. So this is the max. This is the min. Okay. So which of the following equations has a maximum of 3, a minimum at 1, and a y-intercept of 3? Okay. So if we want to chop this out, so maximum of 3, minimum at 1, so that means my midline is 2, because it's halfway between. So this is my maximum and my y-intercept. So since it's starting at the maximum y-intercept, okay, your sine functions can go away, all right? So then after your maximum, goes to your midline, then to your minimum, midline. So this function is cosine, because your maximum is at 3, and also your y-intercept. Then your minimum is at 1. So this is cosine plus 2, because your midline is plus 2, your amplitude is 1. Okay? And at which x value will the equation reach a maximum y value of 2? So let me graph this out for you. First, we have to find the period. So 2 pi over 1/3, multiply top and bottom by 3, so the period is 6 pi. So to find these increments, half of 6 pi is 3 pi. Half of 3 pi is 3 pi over 2. Then we have 3 pi over 2 times 3 is 9 pi over 2. Okay, we have an amplitude of 2. So you have 2 and -2. However, it's a reflection, so we start at -2, then we go to our midline, 3 pi over 2, then we're at 2 at 3 pi, back at 9 pi over 2, and then 6 pi. So our maximum y value of 2 is at 3 pi. Okay, so it's better if you sketch the graph to help you to figure out these equations or figure out these answers. Okay, which equation has a period of pi, okay, and a vertical shift of 1? So if you have a period of pi, to find the b value, period equals 2 pi over b. You cross multiply, so you get pi times b equals 2 pi. Divide by pi. So your b value is going to be 2. So right now we could cross out this one, and this one, okay? And has a vertical shift of +1. So our b value is 2, positive shift of 1. This is my equation, okay? Now, this comes up a lot. Select the equation for the graph below, okay? When you're doing these graphs or finding equations, you always use the y-axis as your base, okay, as where you start. Then you see where it starts. Okay, this is where it starts, the graph, and it completes one rotation at 2 pi. So this is a sine graph because you're starting at the midline, okay? My amplitude is 3 above and 3 below, so my amplitude is 3, and it's 2 pi units. So amplitude of 3, okay, these all have 3. And if it's 2 pi, then if I have 2 pi equals 2 pi over b, cross multiply, 2 pi times b equals 2 pi, divide by 2 pi, and b equals 1, okay? So since the b value equals 1, this goes away, this goes away, this goes away. So, and my amplitude, excuse me, is 3, because it's the same distance from the midline to the max and midline to the min. So the correct answer here is this first one, okay? Now, that's how to find equations. You always use the y-axis as your starting point. If it's starting at the midline, it's a sine graph. If it's starting at your maximum and or your minimum, it is a cosine graph. Okay, so that's how you could tell the difference. You always use your y-axis as your starting point. Okay, now if you look at this one here, use a graph for the remaining 3 questions. What is the type of graph and the a value? So they're looking for the type, either sine or cosine, and what the a value is. Well, if you look at this graph, 4 is the midline, So this is the midline, the center of the graph. Well, it's not starting there. So it's cosine. It is a cosine graph. So these guys we could eliminate. Now the a value, we have 4 to 7, the distance, and 4 to 1 is the other distance. So from here to here and from here to here. So again, let me just highlight that for you. From midline to the max is 3, and midline to the min is 3. So that's your amplitude. Okay, now, is it positive or negative? Amplitude is always positive. However, if there's a reflection, then your A value would be negative. In this case, it would be negative because it's upside down. So you would have cosine and your A value is -3. Okay, your A value is -3. If it just asks for the amplitude, then it would be positive. But the A value is negative. Then if we look at what is the period and vertical shift, so the period to complete one full rotation, okay, starting here and ending right there is 2 pi units, okay. The vertical shift is your midline, which is 4. So the period is 2 pi and your vertical shift is 4. So if we know the A value, if we put this all together, the A value is -3. We know that it's cosine. We know the period is 2 pi. And we know that the amplitude the amplitude is -3 and the vertical shift is +4. If we go back here, +4 should be -3 and it's 2 pi units. Do you see this equation anywhere? No. It'll be none of the above. Okay. If this one was -3 cosine +4, then this would be correct, but we don't see that here. So it would be none of the above. Okay. Hope that answers some questions. Again, we will be going through some of this on tomorrow, okay, regarding the formative, as well as some other questions that might have come up. And then we're going to talk about your next quiz, your task quiz, and what to look at for the trig test, as well as this final task. Okay, so if you have any questions, as always, please reach out. Thanks.